Next, we have Dr. Vanessa Stelzenmüller, who will be speaking. Vanessa, are you able to speak and share the screen?
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'll just introduce you as you share your screen. So Vanessa heads the research unit on marine spatial management at the German Institute of Sea Fisheries in Bremerhaven, Germany. Vanessa has coordinated various national projects and international tasks in relation to risk assessment and marine spatial planning. She advises the German MSP process and contributes and chairs to a number of ICES expert groups. Thank you, Vanessa. We can see your screen.
Yeah, so thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about some challenges for the revision of the Marine Spatial Plan of the German EEZ of the North Sea. So basically, the first round of the Marine Spatial Plan has been implemented in 2009. And as you can see on that figure, it has basically, it works with priority areas and reservation areas. So priority area means a certain use is giving priority over another use. And as it's the case for most plans in Northern Europe, it has been really driven by the expansion of the offshore renewables. And so it's important here to mention that within the areas designated for offshore wind farms, no other uses are possible, and also this the restriction of uses that applies also for the 500-meter safety zone. So, and this, after a decade now, this plan is now under revision. So the planners, the respective authority, has set out from the beginning that the new plan or the revised plan should be more integrated. It should also try to implement an ecosystem approach. It should consider environmental targets and also the trends of sectoral developments. And they really wanted to consider changes in recent legislations, sectoral plans, and also look into the project findings of scientific projects. And in particular, the last point, I would like to focus on a couple of minutes. So on the right-hand side, you can see the process that has been laid out, how the revision process is going to look like. And we are right in the middle of that. Just a couple of weeks ago, the draft revised plan has been published. So for the next slides, I would like to introduce you to some conflicts and synergies that have been emerging over the last 10 years after the implementation of the offshore, of the implementation of the Marine Spatial Plan. This is the North Sea, the southern North Sea. You can see it's a very busy area. So the areas in blue are basically the areas that are planned for offshore renewables, offshore wind development, and in green are nature conservation sites. So basically the key conflict that emerged from the planning activities or planning offshore renewables have been in between offshore renewables and nature conservation and offshore renewables and fisheries. So also we see in some research developing over the last years that looked into co-use options and synergies with the renewables, for example, renewables in aquaculture. And also, we also conducted quite some work and to understand the spatial temporal adaptations of fishing activities due to the loss of fishing grounds and the consequences, specifically the socio-ecological consequences to these displacements. And we also see that planning, that national planning has really cross-border effects, economic effects, since we have international fisheries in our EEZs. So, but because in Germany we have been on the forefront of installing offshore wind farms, we are now having a discussion on what are the emerging fisheries benefits that we can expect from these man-made structures. So we can see first results, empirical results really, on the effects on benthic communities and benthic biomass due to these artificial reef structures such as the monopiles for school protection. Also, we can see that marine mammals are more often visiting these sites, and already we have, based on tagging studies, we can see them forage behavior. And there are also expectations on the potential spillover of biomass of fish and decapods such as brown crab from offshore wind farms. So, and this is the point I would like to talk to you in a little bit more detail. I would like to report a bit on a case study we conducted about 20 kilometers of the island of Helgoland, which is an offshore island, and it took us 1.5 years of hard negotiation with a wind farm owner or business to let them to convince them to let us in to do some really empirical work. So what we did, we really wanted to understand if we can see some spillover effects from offshore wind farms into the vicinity of the monopile. So we have sampled at 41 stations. We deployed baited pots, chains, so pots in a chain, and we let them soak for 24 hours. So what we wanted to really catch is brown crab. This is what you see on the right-hand side, Cancer pagurus. It's culturally very locally an interesting resource, but we can see in the southern North Sea, this resource is gaining more and more importance. And so this is why it's a very interesting case, and it's a passive gear fisheries, so with a very selective gear. So here you can see some preliminary results. Basically, you can see on the x-axis the distance to the nearest turbines, and you can see the total catches for smaller and larger crabs. So basically, the message is here that we can see a decrease of catches with increasing distance of the monopiles. And also what has been very interesting for us, that we found small and large crabs aggregating somehow around the monopiles, which is an indication that these areas can function as a nursery area. So this has been a very local case study, and we really wanted to see if we can see spatial temporal adaptations of the fishing effort around the offshore wind farms, so fishing effort by fleets targeting Cancer pagurus, targeting decapods. So basically we used the VMS data, and in particular for this type of fisheries, it has been very hard to clean the data and to really differentiate between fishing and steaming and other noise within the data. So, but so the key message, or the thing that emerged, is what you can see on the right-hand side. We can see over the last years, within the last 4 or 5 years, an increase of fishing effort, particularly at distances smaller than 5 kilometers to the offshore wind farms. And this is around 20 to 40 meters, at 20 to 40 meters depth. This is the area where the offshore wind farms are installed. So looking at the other extreme, at distances above 30 kilometers from the offshore wind farms, we can see that there's not much change of fishing efforts. So these are established habitats. So basically the main result is here that we can see some evidence at smaller distances to the offshore wind farms that there seems to be a fisheries benefit, or some new type of fisheries that has been established over the last couple of years. So, and as I promised before, just in July 2020, the revised plan, or the draft revised plan, has been published. It's now going to be in the consultation phase, but it's in German. I apologize, but I try to translate as best as I can. So basically, the key points I would like to mention here, that we can see in blue, this area for shipping. This has been enlarged and aligned to the neighbor countries. And you can see larger areas in red. These are the priority areas for offshore renewables. And here, the idea is to really meet the nation's, or the Germany's targets of 20 gigawatt until 2030. This is why we have these areas considered. Another important point is the spatial designation of marine conservation areas. So we have marine conservation areas, and it has been implemented under a different European legislation. So the Natura 2000 sites, which has been driven, or the process has been driven by the European Habitats and Birds Directive, but now this is part of the Marine Spatial Plan, so it has been integrated. In a textual way, the multi-use options and compatible uses are now going to be assessed by each activity that's going to be placed. And when fisheries is concerned, we can see now there's a reservation areas for fishery. This is a small arrow that's pointing up in the north. This is a fishery for Norway lobster. This is another crustacean species which likes very distinct habitats, and this is why it's one of the few fisheries that is really can be really pinpointed to a certain place. And now here comes the interesting part. There are now in the text some suggestions to allow passive gear fisheries up to 300 meters to the offshore wind farms. And this kind of 300-meter distance has been, of course, influenced by the results, by the empirical evidence that we produced. And this is leading me, or this brings me back to the challenges from a scientific perspective for the revision process. So from a scientist's perspective, to advise marine spatial planning process. So key to this is really to account for the socio-ecological complexity of resource uses such as fisheries. So socio-ecological complexity means it's really to understand what's happening. Do we see something like a spillover? And what would it mean to have sustainable fisheries going on? What would be the kind of management that the plan should encompass? So, and then as we have seen in the draft plan that the targets for green energy, also for renewable energy, has been implemented in the plan, has been planned for. So the question is, for example, can planning, marine spatial planning, really contribute also to the long-term adaptive capacity of fisheries to, for example, more flexible measures? So just identifying important fishing grounds is not really enough, and it's not, we really need the forward look, also mentioning here the climate change effects. So, when we do this kind of work, we also see the big gap on international monitoring data that allows us to extrapolate ecological effects of offshore wind farms to more ecosystem scales. And also, when you would like to quantify the economic effects for fisheries, for example, you immediately run into the trap of the lack of data, and you have problems in trying to quantify really effects and potentials for fisheries. And what we see, well, from a scientific perspective, trying to engage with the offshore renewable industry, that we see, or I see, that marine spatial planning really has a role in facilitating also a better collaboration between sectors to enable, for example, a smooth data collection, and to collaborate and to improve really the dialogue to get a better knowledge and to really have new data. And my last point, I think, is the take-home message from this is understanding ecological and economic effects of the plans is key for revising marine spatial planning. So only when we have a better understanding what the plan does or what the effects are, the plan can, in the new round, can have more precisions on regulations for example, decommissioning, or regulations, for example, for passive gear fisheries. So with that, I would really like to thank and acknowledge my colleagues that contributed substantially to this work, and I would like to thank you again for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Vanessa.